Can you learn to fly and become a pilot with just a driver license? There is some late breaking news from the FAA that's going to blow you away. That and much more on today's episode of Aviation Intrigue. Welcome on board.
Aviation, intrigue.
Hi, Gopal. How are you feeling today?
Now, I got something bug. We were at a family reunion for 4 days in Boston, and I've been sick, and it's not fun to be sick, I'm telling you.
No, it's not fun. Hopefully you're on the mend, but you sound a little hoarse, and it sounds like you're a little tired. If it was a nice day today, you probably wouldn't go out flying. Am I correct?
Of course not. I have my box of Kleenex here and Advil and Mucinex and everything. And of course, yeah, no, there's no way I'm going flying. I'm not in any position to fly. As you know, Elaine, that as pilots, we go through self-evaluations to make sure that on any given day that we are capable of flying. We are making quick decisions and we don't want anything compromising.
Absolutely. That's something that you do as a self check for pilots of all levels. And that is something where, even though as a private pilot, you may have a medical certificate from the FAA, there are people who don't have those medical certificates, and yet they still go flying and they still self certify before they go that they're feeling well. Can you explain that a little bit?
Airline pilots, for example, the people who fly this big jets, they have the strictest medical requirements in terms of how good their vision needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. And they also go through medical certification with the FAA much more frequently. And then there's a category called commercial pilots who do that with slightly less strict requirements. And then private pilots, which is a vast majority of pilots, they go through a sort of a basic level of medical, but you still need that. You cannot fly without that if you want to be at least a private pilot.
And then there's a level below that, and now it's gotten a little bit easier where you just need a driver's license. So if you are fit enough to have that, you should be fit enough to fly.
Yeah, exactly. So there is some late breaking announcement that came from the FAA at the EAA that we did 2 episodes on the Oshkosh Air Venture, which we'll put the links for people to go check it out. But one of the biggest announcement that came is a new program that the FAA is launching that is going to open up the world of aviation.
Yes, they announced in late July, and this came from a lot of the notes I have on this came from EAA, the host of the Air Venture show, that this removes a couple of barriers for people who might be interested in learning to fly and flying for personal recreation and for personal travel, just like most private pilots. But it removes a lot of the medical barriers, because before that, the light sport certificate that existed for about 10 years really limited you to very narrow spectrum of aircraft that you could fly. And this opens up to pretty much the same aircraft that most private pilots fly without having to get that FAA medical. And if you follow that light sport training program, you also don't have to go through all of the requirements required for the private pilot certificate, but it does qualify you to go out there and fly for fun on nice days.
I'm not a light sport pilot. I've never been in one. So can you give a little bit description of what is this light sport, let's say, compared to a typical 4-seat? Most people, when they think of airplane, they think of Cessna, right? So compared to a Cessna, what do these look like?
Sure. Probably one of the most common aircraft people will see out there, people flying for fun, is a Cessna 172 or its equivalent, a 4-seat small airplane that can carry 4 people under certain circumstances. And that was a little too heavy to qualify for light sport pilot training, this new certificate that was created, again, about a decade ago, that did not require the FAA medical. Get that certificate on a driver's license. And the catch to that was that the type of aircraft you were allowed to fly under light sport were very, very small. I believe the weight limit was 1,320 pounds, which limited it to very small, very light, mostly 2-seat aircraft that were either going to be very old aircraft, like your vintage Cubs and Champs that met that weight limit, or new aircraft that were built just for that type of pilot certificate, but were maybe a little too pricey or not as conventional as something like the Cessnas you see out there. And so while the light sport certificate was really great, it was rather limiting. And with this new announcement, they've opened that light sport privilege to fly for fun on nice days to aircraft like the four-seat Cessna, something that may be a little bit more ergonomic for people in terms of the weight allowed and a little roomier, by some opinions, a little bit easier to learn to fly in. And the real limit there would just be that you are still only allowed to carry one passenger. But in most cases, that's all a lot of people need.
I think you preemptively answered a question I was going to ask. So when we say light sport, the light means certain weight category. So there was a weight limit. So your airplane needs to be lower than that in order to be a light sport. Is that right?
Yes, that was the original light sport qualification. And again, it limited people to pretty much very, very small, either very old or very new two-seat purpose-built airplanes to meet that weight limit. And that just wasn't a great fit for a lot of people who did want to learn to fly, but was not going to pursue the FAA medical requirements. They just wanted to fly on a driver's license. And with this new announcement and some other limitations that were lifted on training, you could fly those more common airplanes that you see out there.
So this looks like it's good news from two different sides. If you are a light sport pilot or a light sport pilot wannabe, you now have access to a bigger range of aircraft that you can fly. So that's a good thing. And if you are a person who's already flying this bigger airplane, but maybe medically you have some issues, does it open up now your ability to fly these new category of aircraft on light sport?
That's a great point with existing pilots who may have gone through that medical certification, which, by the way, you have to renew periodically. So it's not just a once and done if you get the FAA medical. There are a lot of people out there who come across medical conditions that they get over time where they may not be able to qualify anymore. So can those pilots fly with just a driver's license? Well, you could in the past. Under the original light sport, you actually had to downgrade the type of aircraft you flew to meet that 1,320-pound weight limit. And again, that was very limiting to pilots who maybe were used to flying four-seater or even the slightly larger aircraft. And now with this, they could actually fly under light sport rules with the same aircraft they may already be flying, which will really, really reduce the barriers to entry into people who want to continue flying with possibly medical issues that may have not qualified them before.
And we should mention that in all these cases, you still are responsible on the day of flight to determine if you're capable. Back to what I said, I am perfectly certified to go fly, but today I'm not flying because even common medicine, for example, Sudafed, can cause drowsiness that you may not be aware of that is going to limit your ability while in flight. That's why the FAA also puts the onus on the pilot at the day of flight.
Yep, that will all still take place for anybody who's out there flying, whether you've got that FAA medical or you just have a driver's license. So that will not change.
Yeah, we should mention that the glider pilots have always come in this category, that they don't need to get an FAA medical, but they, quote, self-certify to fly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you mentioned, as we did in the glider episode, that you don't need any medical certification to fly gliders. And it would be great to just see people who want to choose to fly gliders, light aircraft. And now that the options are more open with just a driver's license, we're hoping that there'll be more people out there interested in learning to fly.
Yeah, and I'll put the glider episode link in the comments section. These changes that the FAA has introduced has got to make flight training more accessible and cheaper in general.
Right. And that's what's really exciting in terms of the changes coming, because we talked about the light sports certificate has been out there for a number of years, but now that they've opened it up to aircraft that are very typical for flight schools, aren't going to be as hard to find, in some cases cheaper to rent for your flight training or to rent as a pilot, that can make things a lot easier and cheaper to become a pilot, because as you and I know,
An average flight training in the smallest of airplanes can take upwards of 60 hours to become a pilot, and $10,000 or much more than that, depending on the area that you live in the country.
much more. And in some cases, the average number of hours, now only 40 is required for your basic FAA private pilot certificate, but a lot of people take longer than that. And so the cost can be in the tens of thousands of dollars or more just to get that basic license. Now, what if you just want to fly for fun, for personal recreation, in good weather? Some of those barriers have just been removed in terms of flight training.
That's a good point, because our generic pilot training includes certain requirements, being able to fly at night, being able to fly inadvertently into clouds and how to recover from it, et cetera, et cetera. So it teaches you to fly in these situations. And as a light sport pilot, you cannot be flying in those situations anyway, right?
Right. The light sport certificate that has existed did take out some components of the private pilot training, again, to make it easier, taking less time and expense for people to just enter with the basic pilot's license. For example, you mentioned the night training. A few hours of training at night are required for the private pilot's license. That's the one that requires the FAA medical. It also required a few hours of instrument time to show you how to get out of the clouds if you accidentally flew into them, and have those in your training belt to, again, if you're careful, to fly around on a nice day for personal travel. It also cuts out a few hours of what they call cross-country time, flying a distance to another airport that you're not familiar with, learning navigation, things like that. The sport pilot's license only has some shorter cross-country requirements, so you don't have to fly as far in order to meet that qualification. And that can cut down on significantly on the cost and the number of hours you need to just get out there and learn how to fly.
I've been sick for the last 3 days. I've been watching a lot of YouTube and I've been watching a lot of these RVs and campers. And one of the commonalities I'm finding is that you could be a recreational camper, for example, and you could just go buy one and tow it behind your vehicle. But if you're buying those big motor coaches, you may need additional training. But if you're never going to buy that motor coach, you do not need to go through that training or how to turn a 40-foot bus because you're towing a 20-foot camper. So this sounds exactly like that. I just want to be a recreational flyer. I want to be a fair weather Sunday flyer, and therefore don't put me through the rigor, which I'm never going to be in that situation.
Right, and that's true for existing pilots today. A lot of them don't fly at night, and a lot of them are extremely careful about the weather so that they will never get close to flying in the clouds or having that situation happen. So, in spite of some of the questions about that, like, wow, is that light sport pilot's license going to be safer or less safe? It's going to be fine, because you're going to get all the training you need to safely operate that airplane in good weather, and you're going to learn how to judge the weather so that you won't be going up in conditions that you shouldn't be in.
So what is this program called, and how do people find out more?
The program officially is called Mosaic, MOSAIC, and that is short for Modernization of Special Airworthiness Certification.
So I assume in true government fashion, it is a long document.
It is, from what I understand, a package of FAA regulations that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long. I did not have time to read all of that before today's show, but I think we put in a nutshell what it will mean to pilots of the future and for pilots out there flying around today in terms of the medical reform. That is one piece of it.
So we'll go ahead and put the link to that shorter version of it in our show notes and the description so people can read more about it. And of course, it has links to the FAA original document if somebody really is having trouble falling asleep and wants to read long government documents.
Sounds good. It's all in there.
I'm sure anybody who's thinking of taking flight training, this is a good news, but this also opens up aircraft manufacturers to make new models to fit this new certification regulations.
Yes, in that huge package we talked about. So the biggest things for flight training for light sport pilot certification, that is awesome. The medical reform aspect of that we just talked about, that's really great. But there's a whole other piece, and I'm guessing that's what's taking up the hundreds of pages in this new FAA regulation, is that the light sport aircraft manufacturers, some of them actually went into business a number of years ago to build these 1,320-pound airplanes for light sport pilots. Well, now that weight limit is gone for aircraft, and people are wondering, well, what's going to happen to those manufacturers? Well, in this package, the FAA decided we're not going to leave you high and dry. We're actually going to open up the light sport category of aircraft so that these companies can look into some more innovation. Now they can build larger, heavier, more complex aircraft all under the light sport manufacturing rules, which, by the way, that set of rules for something called light sport aircraft did not actually follow the same type of manufacturing rules that are put down by the FAA for things like your Cessnas, your Pipers, the larger common manufacturers. And so this was a way to allow those manufacturers to hopefully innovate for the future, stay in business as light sport manufacturers, but without that weight limitation.
At the same time, the more conventional aircraft manufacturers can now get into this realm that perhaps they have stayed away in the past.
Absolutely. And that drive to allowing industry to look at innovation for the future, because who knows what's coming down the line for even personal aircraft design. There could be some amazing new technology and new designs coming down. And now that this is open to so many more pilots and future pilots, those manufacturers are now open to innovate with less regulation.
The program is called Mosaic, and we will put the link to the shorter document in the description. Elaine, I am curious. So I have read this document, not the big one, the small one. And I know you have also. We talked and we thought about it. What is your take on it? Are you excited? Are you worried? Neutral?
I think this is really exciting. The term medical reform has been in a small general aviation for a long time, because I have met a lot of would-be pilots who, through the expensive obstacles it would have taken to get that FAA medical, could not have done that. And the fact that that barrier has been removed in order for them to learn to fly in, let's say, the kind of airplane I learned to fly in, a Cessna 152, a very simple, easy to fly two-seat airplane, I think is really exciting, because it's going to remove that barrier for a lot of people who otherwise would not have been able to learn how to fly.
Yeah, I kind of share your excitement, but there's a concern, which is suddenly the medical requirements are much less stringent. And let's face it, people take liberty. I mean, it's like people should not be driving drunk, but they do it, and they put their lives and other people's lives in jeopardy every day. It's not because of the law, it's because of the self-governance. And to me, one of the concerns is now you're putting much more self-governance, and you're assuming people are honest and they are going to make the right call, which worries me.
There's a lot of self-governance when it comes to, of course, driving. You mentioned the issues that come up there, and as well with flying. Every day we're out there flying, and if we need to have a medical, if we need to have recurrent training that's required for pilots, all of that is on us to be responsible for. So I'll point out something about the medical certification part, because I do get a lot of questions from people interested in learning to fly. Well, how strict is the medical? Can I fly if I wear glasses? Can I fly if I'm taking certain medication for common conditions? High blood pressure comes to mind, because it's a very, very common question I get. And I say, absolutely. It is still very easy to get that third class medical if you'd like to seek that full blown private pilot certification. And if you don't want to pursue that, you can now fly under light sport. And this reform that happened with the medical opening up to a larger aircraft and a common training aircraft would not have happened if there wasn't a good safety record with that original light sports set of rules. And they have shown, because they've tracked this ever since the advent of the light sport pilot certificate, the non-medical type, that has not affected flight safety in any significant way. And so they've shown that we can move forward in opening up the larger window of aircraft for people to learn to fly with just a driver's license. And I think that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah, I hope you're right, because my other concern is something you mentioned, which is the training requirements are also reduced, that you don't have to do certain training. Now, I understand you're not supposed to be in that situation. Once again, it puts that human to make a decision. And let's face it, humans make bad choices. There are a lot of people who either knowingly or unknowingly make choices. Even if I give a lot of credit to people, people make choices without realizing what they're doing. You just don't realize you're in trouble until you are inside it.
We'd really welcome comments on that as to whether this will be less safe, more safe. I think is going to be the focus of flight training, and not so much the things that you may not need, such as flying at night.
We have both aviation and non-aviation audience. It'll be interesting to compare whether you think this is a good idea, bad idea, neutral. Let us know.
So, Gopal, when is this actually going to happen? And if I were interested in learning to fly now, where can I start?
So it was announced in late July, and it was supposed to take effect 90 days after that. So expect sometime late October. And I believe flight schools, both that offer conventional training and light sport training, are getting their materials, and federal regulations are going to take a little bit time. I would say anybody who wants to get started, reach out to your local flight school. Most small airports, big airports have flight schools. Reach out. There are a lot of independent flight instructors, like the two of us. We can provide some information, although much of it is late breaking and evolving. So in the next couple of months, things are going to become much more clear.
This is aviation, aviation intrigue.